It's not done easy yet.
Just waiting for the stream to start. Thanks. Okay, looks good. All right. So welcome to the meeting of the Governance Audit Committee. Before we start, please can I remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded and archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, please raise your hand if in the chamber or use the raise hand function if joining remotely. The chair, once appointed, will indicate when it is your turn to speak, so please then select the request to speak button, which will allow you to come on screen. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. The chat function should only be used to highlight any technical issues or to get the attention of the chair or a Democratic Services Officer. Thank you. And moving straight into the agenda, on item 1, please can I have nominations for the position of chair. Councillor Hooper.
Can I nominate Gareth Chapman?
Okay, do you have a second of that, please? Councillor Goodjohn? Yeah. Do you have any other nominations? Okay, I'll take that as none. So if I can ask Gareth Chapman to take a position of chair, thank you. And congratulations.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad we didn't have a vote on it, though, Gareth. I never know what may have gone wrong. But can I thank committee for appointing me as chair and for hopefully the confidence they have in me in ensuring that the meetings are run correctly and properly and allowing each and every one of them to have their appropriate input as and when is required. Item 2 on the agenda is the appointment of the vice chair. Do we have any nominations, please? Councillor Goodjohn.
Can I nominate Mr. Ireland, please?
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Are there any other nominations? No? Can we put to the vote? Anyone against? Raise your hand on the machine or in the chamber. Item 3 on the agenda then is the apologies for absence. I think everyone's here.
Correct, Chair. No apologies.
Yeah. Okay. Item 4 then, minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of April 2024, and these are for correctness only. Are there any issues? No? Can I have someone move that the correct record? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Goodjohn, thank you. Anyone against? No, thank you very much. Item 5 on the agenda then is to receive any declaration of interest, and if you've got a declaration, the nature of such interest. Do we have any? No? Okay. Well, can I ask just committee that we deal with item 8 next, because we've got officers who are obviously being called to the committee in regards to accounting for the recommendations from previous audit reports. If you'd allow, if people are happy for item 8 to be taken first. Yep, okay, thank you. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Wathen, Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. This report is in relation to the Internal Audit Limited opinions, which have been presented to committee previously, and it's for members to gain assurance from senior managers that action has actually been taken to demonstrate the necessary improvements in control. As part of the delivery of internal audit service, we need to comply with the public sector internal audit standards. And as such, we need to make sure we've got an annual internal audit plan, which comes to committee and is approved by committee. And we need to make sure we've got sufficient workload within that plan to enable me to give an overall opinion at the year end on the adequacy of the governance arrangements, internal controls and risk management processes in place. So each audit job sets out a scope, and we try and determine that the services are delivered economically, efficiently, effectively, and the public funds are resources are safeguarded. We can test the controls, and the conclusions are reached based on the evidence obtained through each audit. Excuse me. At the conclusion of each audit, we then provide an opinion on that level of assurance gained. And that's balanced. It's based on the strengths and weaknesses identified from those tests. And the opinions we use are come from CIPFA, recommended by CIPFA, and used throughout the internal audit sector within the UK. And those are outlined for you on figure 1 there, Chair. Where we have weaknesses which outweigh the strengths, then the level of assurance will become limited or no assurance. And in your last report to committee, progress versus plan, we reported that there were 8 substantial, 31 reasonable and 9 limited assurance opinions issued in 23-24 following our audit work. Reassuringly, no assurance opinions. And it's my responsibility as the head of audit to report any weaknesses in control to senior management and for operational management to take appropriate action to improve the level of control and minimise or eradicate the associated risk. In terms of governance, it's the committee's responsibility then to ensure a proper process is in place to confirm such action is being taken. So following the latest report issued to committee in April in relation to the progress versus plan, we identified that there were 3 further limited assurance opinions reported in, including debtors, residential homes, food stock control, and leisure centres, contract management and performance. At the time, I provided a summary as to why we felt, as an audit team, the opinion was limited assurance based on the evidence we'd undertaken, and also provided assurance to members that operational managers had agreed our action plan to implement our recommendations to move that forward and make the necessary improvements. Following discussions, members felt it was important to hear from senior management to find out what the current progress was in terms of implementation of that agreed management action plan. The relevant directors, heads of service have subsequently provided further details, and that's outlined in Appendix A for your information tonight, Chair. The implementation of recommendations should improve the overall control environment and minimise any associated risk, and to give members further reassurance that any limited opinions will have a follow-up audit in the following financial year. So, Chair, the relevant directors and heads of service are here this evening to go through the report and respond to any questions members may have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andrew. Can I suggest we go through them one by one? Appendix A1 deals firstly with the debtors' recommendations and implementation update. Number 2 is the residential food costs and stock control. And number 3 is the leisure centres. So if we deal with debtors first, I don't know whether this is you, Matt, or... Yeah, OK. Members, have you got any questions in regard to the debtors' implementation update timetable? No, no one show it. Well, I've got some questions then. In regards to reference 1.6, which is medium, the regular debt recovery actions outstanding, the actions taken obviously set out that you go to one collection agency, which is Marsden's. The question I was going to ask is, do you use more than one collection agency, or is it a sole contractual relationship with Marsden's? Because if you then go on to the narrative, obviously cases go out after the first 12 months. They were sent final notice on the 23rd of April with a view to these going out in May. What's then said, unfortunately, it appears that these notices took well over a week to land, so presumably there's a time limit between the authority sending them to Marsden's and them getting them out. I'm just wondering whether there was any contractual issue there. Are they supposed to send the letters out within a timescale? And if they fail to comply with that, are any sanctions applicable? And how do you pick these issues up? Is there a performance management regime to make sure that the collection agency actually meets your requirements? So that's one question. Do you want me to carry on? Yeah.
Thank you. So at the heart of this, there'd been a lull during the last financial year in the use of collection agencies, and we should understand that a distinction between a collection agency and enforcement. These aren't bailiffs, but we've used Marston's extensively on council tax debt recovery, but we've not been using them, although they were contractually engaged on the council's sundry debt. So we've re-established the relationship with them in terms of their collection input. But before we did that, what we needed to do, we suddenly couldn't engage them and get them following up on existing debt where we'd perhaps previously written to a debtor 3 or 6 months ago. So what we've done, and is an exercise for all debt over 12 months to start with, where we've effectively issued all of those debtors a final council letter saying that we intend to pass their details onto the collection agency. So that's what's been done. Those letters have gone out. What we're now dealing with and working well with services on is actually picking up and making sure that those are all valid debts still, that they've not been paid, or that the service wasn't actually ever received and the debt should have been cancelled. So there's been quite a number of phone calls and emails on that. We're just working through those, and once we've finished that, and that's going to be in the next couple of days, we'll then start sending batches of invoices across to the agency.
Thanks for that, Matt. Do we know what the success rate is once they're sent out to the collection agency? Do we have any figures for that?
I don't have anything for you this evening. Certainly, they've been very effective in working with us on council tax.
Okay, no, that's good. I think obviously I'm likely to ask committee that you come back in 6 months just to update us on that. So presumably some of those figures can be presented then. The next, obviously, the final paragraph of that action point, there's something missing there. There's a set of dots. So the 10 cases in a meeting on. So do we know what that is?
Yeah, that's apologies. That's my fault. We sent a tracked document round, and I was expecting somebody to put a date in for me, and then it's come forward here without a date in. But I've talked to the Exchequer manager on that point when I noticed earlier this evening. And what we've agreed is we need to finish going through those 700 or so invoices over 12 months, send them to the collection agency, and then review whether we need legal input. So that date's going to be a little bit fluid. And on your last question, just the process of us sending out those final reminders to debtors, there is money coming in because of that process, which we'd always expected.
Thanks for that. On 1.7, it says good practice guide's been updated and due for circulation. This is currently with the head of finance for review and will go live to SLT in May. Has it gone live?
So we're using it as the working draft, and it's actually on the agenda for SLT on the 28th of May.
Thank you for that. And the last one is reference 4.1. Clearly, we've got a not implemented there, and the reason is that the team hasn't had an opportunity to progress with this as of yet. And temporary officers are currently providing presumably additional capacity. There's a revised implementation date of the 30th of June, which is now only about 35 days away. Are we likely to meet that 30th of June target or not?
I picked that up in the same earlier conversation this evening. I don't think we'll hit 30th of June. It's a really difficult one because it's right we invest in those in that documentation in the team when we have turnover, which we invariably do. It means that we can get people up and running and conversant with our systems and processes as quickly as possible. But equally, we're really struggling with capacity in the team. So I've talked again to the Exchequer manager, and we're going to put a schedule together of a prioritised schedule to work through which ones we need to get done first and start working through them systematically across the summer.
Okay, I've got no other questions. Unless anyone else has, is there any comments? No? Can I suggest to the committee then that we ask Matt to come back with an update report in 6 months to pick up all, hopefully all the issues that have been raised this evening and those references that have been partly implemented. So I would hope you've got about whatever it is, 11 days left to implement some of the others. So if you could come back with a comprehensive report and hopefully we can dispatch you on your way then not to come back. Is a committee happy with that? Thank you very much. The next one is residential food cost and stock control. Have we got any questions on this? Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. There is a bit of a theme running through these reports in terms of the 3 reports tonight and the Oracle Fusion implementation one, which is all about value for money. And I noticed in this one in particular, you have to forgive us because we don't have the full detail of the report, so I don't know all the good stuff that was being done as well. But in particular, this one has elements around ordering processes, then actually making sure that there are standard quantities and therefore costs. So again, making sure you're managing the costs of individual meals and services provided. And the last one around making sure that authorization is there in terms of the amount that's being spent. So all of these sort of had a value for money theme, and that flowed through into the leisure centre one as well. But this one in particular, I just wanted to get sort of confirmation that value for money was a key part of this process. And I don't mean cheapest, value for money, because that really comes through as suggesting that these controls are missing, which would ensure value for money and need to be in place. So I don't know if there's anyone there that can provide that assurance, please.
Ian?
Hi, good evening. I'm joined today by Marika Jenkins, who's the operational manager for our residential care homes, but I can respond in respect of that. Yeah, the value for money is clearly integral to what we do, and Marika really closely manages the budget across all 4 residential care homes. It was as a result of the work that Marika undertook herself and her scrutiny of the budget of the 4 care homes when she identified an anomaly in relation to one of her care homes and the spend within that care home, that she asked for our internal audit team to come in and to provide us with some additional scrutiny in relation to our spend across the homes, which has identified the action plan that was put into place. Just one other thing I would say as well as in terms of value for money is about quality and quality of food. The care homes support some of our most vulnerable residents in our own homes, within our communities. We want to ensure they have good quality, nutritious food. The homes, as you would anticipate, like all of us, have been significantly affected by food inflation and increases in prices, which made this piece of work even more integral.
Thank you for that, Ian. Councillor Prothero.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that this particular piece of work was on stock control of food in care homes. But looking at some of the comments, it's also kind of like referring to what I hope must have been some form of tendered exercise that sits behind these agreements, because, you know, across our care homes, I absolutely understand why you might not want to have a standardised menu, because these are residents and they're entitled to have choice with what they want to eat, and that's really important. But pricing that sits behind it should be standardised across all of our care homes. And I just want to ensure that there was a tendered contract behind everything that has been or is being purchased, which should have some protections through our terms and conditions and through pricing. Whether there's annual uplifts, I don't really know, but yeah, that would be really good to understand if that's the case. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Prothero. Marika, is it Jenkins? Is that right? I apologise if I can't pronounce your name correctly.
Yeah. This is Marika Jenkins. She's our operational manager for our residential care homes.
Okay, did you want to speak? Because her hand is up.
Yes, please, if I can.
Thank you.
In response to that query, I think it's important to remind you, I think, that we are actually in contract with our colleagues in Big Fresh Catering. Now, none of us in residential care pretend to be expert in catering. I mean, I'm a social worker by trade, and we look to our experts, and we contracted with Big Fresh Catering for them to advise us and to audit our systems and to provide us with information and to also arrange those contracts with suppliers. So we have contracts with several suppliers, but are all through Big Fresh Catering. So we piggyback, I suppose, for which of a better description, onto the contracts that Big Fresh Catering have agreed for schools. This exercise has been really useful in as much that it's showed my naivety, I suppose, that I was under the assumption that everything ordered through those companies was a price agreed by Big Fresh. But having done an extensive exercise now and Audit having been the implementation of that process, really has made it clear that there is room for us to be tighter, and that exercise is well underway in time for the summer menu. But to get back to your question, once we've gone through 5 months of orders now. That's a lot of invoices to go through. And we've created a list, I think, so far of 1,700 products that have been ordered by our 4 residential homes. And it's our intention to send that to our biggest suppliers and for them to come back with agreed costs and then to have a restricted order list. So that should help matters going forward.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Can I just pick up a few points? Obviously, sorry, Matthew, sorry.
Sorry, Jay, very late hand. I just wanted to check, and maybe I've misinterpreted what was said, but if in this case, if we're talking about Big Fresh and residential care homes, but also providing other services as part of that contract, can we get some comfort that the department in question are doing a read across to see if these aren't issues in those other parts, or at least sharing this information so the same issues don't occur in other parts of the contract where they're providing services?
Marika?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Big Fresh, obviously, their main concern is schools, and residential and day service are a sideline, for wish of a better description. I know that with schools, it's their ordering is very prescriptive, and they order from the main supplier via an online system, which is called SciPad. We order in our residential homes and in our day services via an order book. So there's quite an old-fashioned way of dealing with it. But at the same time, it's a cost. So SciPad would add to our annual cost for orders that I think are nothing like they are in schools. So I'm not convinced that the cost of SciPad would make a huge difference for us. But I think in relation to your assurances towards schools, I think they have a very different way of a very, a system accessible to them for monitoring, which provides that assurance, I would have thought, which is that SciPad system.
Are there any other questions? No, I've just got a couple of questions. Actually, your answers raise more questions to me than enough. But first question is on point 5.1.1. And I think it covered the last point you made about the ordering processes which are in place. It says here that a new process has been developed and the guidance document provided to internal audits. I was just wondering what internal audit's view was of that process, whether you've given one yet, and if you've not given a view, when has this document been rolled out without your view, or has it been rolled out with your view?
Yeah, if I can answer that question. Yes, it was sent to us. The new process was sent to us. We did look at it and it did address all the issues that we found. So it gave us assurance. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. The second question is similar to the one Matthew raised. I'm just a little bit confused now. Obviously, the residential care homes have got a contract with the BFC, if that's right. And obviously does all their contractual negotiations through BFC. I just want to know, is there a formal contract in place? And if there is there regular performance management meetings in regards to whether the BFC is meeting the requirements of the care homes? Clearly they're meeting the requirements of schools, as quite rightly been said, but are they meeting the requirements of your care homes? And if they're not meeting the requirements or they're not doing what they should be doing, are there any sanctions that can be imposed against the BFC? Marika?
I'll try and answer that question as best as I can. The contract rolls on from year to year, and in the interim period, BFC provide us with a significant level of support, which is agreed in the contract, and that includes the monitoring of produce provided by suppliers. It includes regular audits of our kitchen practices, and it includes assistance with the review of the HACCP and file and catering manual, and it provides assistance with training of our staff. And there are absolutely ways of dealing with underperformance should that be the case, or indeed if they were not working in accordance to their contractual obligations. I mean, I'm pleased to say that thus far they have been very helpful. And as I said, it's extremely helpful to have experts in the catering business advising us on an area that none of us are familiar in as such. And I think that, the fact that, this audit has taken place because I discovered an anomaly and I asked Audit for their assistance. But I don't have any major concerns about Big Fresh Catering and their involvement. And it was my naivety, I think, thinking that all products that were ordered by my homes would be on that list that was provided by Big Fresh, and it never crossed my mind that would not be the case. But yeah, lesson learned, and bigger ownership going forward.
Okay. Just the other question then I've got. Obviously, I don't know how often you have a meeting with BFC. Are they regular meetings? And given it's a year-by-year contract rolling over, how do you actually know you're getting value for money?
As I said, there are a number of agreed actions that they have to comply with in relation to their contract, and that is those audits per year in each of the homes and in the day services. It's also the provision of the contract list with the suppliers and the product lists, and they provide advice on training and food safety, HACCP and the catering manual, and all those things they are providing to us year on year, and they're easy to measure.
Yeah, I understand all that, but it doesn't answer the question about value for money, because I assume no one's tested the market since the rollover contract was put in place.
No, and I certainly haven't done that either. But it's something that we could certainly look at. But yeah, no, that hasn't been done.
Okay, no, thank you. Thanks for the openness and honesty, Marika. Thank you, obviously, for making the referral to audit. That's greatly appreciated. The only other simplistic point, I think, should be in paragraph 5, reference 5.3.1. Obviously, it says it's implemented, and we're submitting the revised or unrestricted order list to Castle Howell by the 17th of May. So that was whatever it was, 3 days ago. Has that been all agreed now and is being taken forward? And can you just explain who JD is? Because obviously I don't know who JD is. It says following a discussion with JD, it's been agreed to have a price file rather than individual prices.
JD is Joan Davies in Audit.
Thank you.
And I can tell you that the Castle Howell list has been completed and has been sent to Castle Howell for their review and prices.
And you haven't had anything back yet, I assume, because it only went off about 3 days. No.
No, I haven't had anything back yet, and it is also something that I wish to run past Big Fresh when it returns.
Okay.
Because I think there needs to be some comparison exercise going on between costs of our products and that might also be purchased in schools.
Yeah, it's interesting because normally if you're contracted with BFC, I would have thought they do most of this for you rather than you doing all the running around and trying to do that. And I think maybe that needs to be looked at in going forward if, you're contracted in moving forward.
Yeah,
but that's me finished. But Councillor Prothero.
I was just picking up on what you just said, Chair. I'm not concerned because you have a contract with Big Fresh and they should really be doing some of that work if you're buying the food through them, as you've described. And honestly, if there is, as Big Fresh will have, a contract with Castle Howell that sits behind these arrangements, whether it's schools or care homes, there should be one price. No, and that's, that you shouldn't be paying a different price. I wanted to know, which is my first question, was that across our care homes, you are paying the same price. Because that was the first question. So you're buying chips in one care home, it has to be one price. But it should be one price anyway to the authority, quite frankly.
It is one price to the care homes. What I have found by going through months of invoices is that not everybody buys the same chips.
No, and that is
not everybody buys the same chicken portion size, and not everybody buys the same fish portion size. So I have a list of, I think it was something in excess of 1,700 products that we've created a list from, and on there are different types of corn flour and different sizes of fish, and so it's been and I agree with what was said, which was it should be Big Fresh's job in relation to their contract, possibly. But I think I instigated the audit, and the recommendation that came back need to be owned by me. So I think once I've done that, I can assure you I'll never do it again because it's months I'll never get back. So I will never do it again. But yeah, so once I've done this exercise and I've handed it back over to Big Fresh for them to do the comparison with prices for schools, I'll be happy to take a back seat. Thank you.
Yeah, and it is, I understand the amount of time that goes into that when you're trying to not standardise things, but just get some sort of parity across the piece. It's a huge task. Anyway,
Who knew?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. It amazes me how we get into the weeds, and maybe it's something I may ask Audit to have a look at about size of chips and type of chips and size of your peak of chicken, whether you get a bigger bit of chicken in the school than you do in a care home. But But there we are, you know, if you're paying the same amount of money, you should get the same thing. Can I thank colleagues then from obviously Marika and Ian for coming today. There is only basically one recommendation that's now not been implemented, but there are some points I think to be picked up. And I think it would be good to get that back in 6 months' time. You know, maybe Audit can have a little look at the issues about the contractual relationship and maybe provide Marika some advice in regards to what BFC should actually be providing for them, because obviously it seems as if Marika's doing a tremendous amount of work which she actually shouldn't be doing. It should be somewhere else and they're being paid for that. So committee happy with that, to get them back in 6 months? Okay, thank you. The next one is the leisure centres, contract monitoring and performance monitoring. Obviously, we've got the appendix A3 before us. Miles, I believe, is here to answer the questions. Are there any questions for Miles on leisure centres? Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. There is a theme again here, which is around contract management, whether it be the last one we just talked about, this one, or back to Oracle Fusion, the other paper on the agenda. So I was pleased to hear that the last team asked internal audit to go in and look at this area and have provided some guidance on how to perhaps control the processes better. And I think there might be some general sort of lessons to be learned around contract management around this. But I also appreciate that evidently from what's written in here, there were some resource challenges as well around this area. The one thing I did want to pick up in particular was around obviously the monitoring or the lack of in terms of the contract and reliance. It seems to me, based on the comments, and again, I'll beg forgiveness on the grounds that I can't see the rest of the report, so I don't know what was good in the report and what else there wasn't, and the findings and the risks that led to the recommendations. But certainly it comes across from the reading that there was a lot of reliance on the contractor here to give information. In particular, under 5.1.2, there's lots of comments in there around no customer complaints have been raised via the council's own complaint system. It's acknowledged that complaints are made directly to the contractor but could be escalated. As a user of one of the legacy leisure centres, I wasn't aware that it wouldn't come through to you if a complaint was raised to the leisure centre. So I'm wondering whether that process is known and whether that actually is a route that would come through to you. Also under that one, it talks about growth in attendance prior to COVID, significant growth in customer number of around 25%. This would indicate a high level of customer satisfaction. That's not necessarily true. There could be many other reasons for that. So that's a bit of an assumption. And the rest of the recommendation responses as well don't really talk about how customer satisfaction is measured other than through the reports from the contractor. So I suppose my question there is, are we doing enough to really measure particularly customer satisfaction with the services provided and therefore the performance of the contractor? And I'm looking for just assurance that despite the resource challenges, that the contractor meetings on a regular basis will be happening, because there seems to be a lot of reliance on the annual one. So yeah, just a couple of points to pick up there, please.
Thanks, Nigel. Miles?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, to say that, there is a lot of reliance on Legacy Parkwood scoring their own homework, essentially, which is fine to a degree, but there needs to be some checks and balances from ourselves. So I accept that. The report to scrutiny, the annual report, was used as the main monitoring vehicle for staff whilst we were short of resources. Again, this report is produced by Parkwood Legacy. That needs more checks and balances. The report detailed in February detailed 117 complaints being received by Parkwood in the period August to July, which is their monitoring period, and 80 plus compliments being received. But there needs to be more work on our side investigating the details of those complaints and how they were dealt with, how they were responded to. So one of the things I'm looking at is using the council's own complaint system, the stage 1 and stage 2 process. I don't see any reason why Parkwood Legacy don't use that system. It's a very good, robust system that we've got. So as part of the performance monitoring arrangements, I'd be looking to introduce that system and for them to use that. So we have full access to the complaints at all time. They can deal with them, but we will see the outcomes to all the complaints and we'll be able to monitor the trends. The other issue in terms of performance monitoring, we have quarterly meetings with Parkwood. The last one was in April, and it was attended by the head of service for the department. The head of service is retiring and leaving on the 4th of August, and I'd already made arrangements to attend personally the next meeting, contract meeting, which is in July. I intend to work with colleagues, and in the report you'll see I've put the performance mechanism under what we term as a balanced scorecard arrangement, where I've got different headings, which essentially involve different departments of the council. So the way I'll deal with the resource loss that we've got in our area is by using colleagues in property services, HR, finance, to basically help me with the monitoring over time. In the July meeting, there'll be a suite of performance indicators that if we don't have any test data, it'll be a datum, essentially, the data collected at that meeting. And every quarter then we will collect the data, and that data will inform then the annual report from Parkwood. So we will be involved in this data every quarter. I will say leisure services is one of the areas where there's a bit of an absence of any benchmarking data, not just Wales-wide, but UK-wide, partly because we all do things slightly differently. But we will benchmark ourselves against ourselves and improve on data if we can't find external sources of such data. So I accept the comments in the audit report. We have mitigation, which is a bit of an issue with some staff resources. It's not a defence. We will improve on these arrangements, starting from the meeting that's just taken place on the 23rd of April, and I will then attend the next meeting. I think my colleague behind me, Tom Bowring's also attending. He's gone out, was it? Yeah, so I will say though as well, it hasn't been that we haven't been doing anything. We spent 18 months agreeing the extension to this contract because it was originally 2012 till 2022. It was a huge piece of work, which I was leading on. I was involved with my colleague Matt on that, because we have a contract that provides us particularly good value for money. When we looked at the extension, we priced undertaking this contract ourselves in-house, and it would have been £1.4 million. And we are the only council that I'm aware of that receives a revenue income from its leisure services contract. Now, the way I obtained that data was by undertaking my own freedom of information request to all other councils to see if they provide me the information. That's how hard it is to get this data. But the information from those who responded indicates that we are the only council receiving a revenue income from our leisure contract. And over the next period up to 2029, we're projected to receive in the region of 300,000 as a revenue income. Still a lot of work to do in terms of customer performance. We accept that, but we have been monitoring the contract at a very high level through the committee process, albeit we need to do a lot more testing ourselves.
Thank you for that, Miles. Nigel, you happy with that?
Yeah, that's really positive and some really interesting information there coming through. So that's great. Thank you. Just two follow-up points. One, do we know that the 117 complaints have been investigated and dealt with? And also, notice satisfaction surveys and customer satisfaction levels, sorry, are in your balanced scorecard, but complaints isn't. I just wondered if that's something that needs to be added. Thank you.
Chair, we've only got at the moment Parkwood Legacy's view on how well or not particularly well they dealt with those complaints. So we will need to get a better grip of that. It's a fact. I'm quite happy to have complaints within the balanced scorecard because it is one of those things we hang our hat on as a council. So it seems absolutely reasonable to me.
Thanks, Miles. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. Miles, I'm interested in understanding a bit more about 5.1.3, the review of roles and job descriptions and how that will improve resilience. And I'd particularly be interested in the context. Nigel referenced the fact that there was less resources. Well, that was a choice of this council to reduce resources. And I'm just wondering whether in hindsight we've taken too much of a scalpel to some of these areas. I'd be interested in your perspective on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. He won't mind me saying, because I asked him before the meeting, but the operational manager who's listed here has been responsible for some of these matters, was off for quite a long period last year with an operation, so he was off for a period of 4 months. And his second in command got a job within waste management. So that together created the problem, if you like, of the lack of resource. It also happened at the same time the head of service was also off. So I perhaps should have stepped in earlier, and I didn't. But I'm confident now with Dave Nevitt being back in work, with support from colleagues in the other areas I've listed there, because they are specialist areas. Then we'll have enough resource to manage this contract properly. I've got no issue. We have had to make difficult decisions with vacant posts, but it hasn't been at service detriment of the leisure contract.
Any other questions? Good job.
Can I ask then, you've still got no one in neighbourhood services that's monitoring the contract, is that right?
The operational manager in neighbourhood services is responsible for monitoring the contract, and if he's not in, it's the head of service who the post will be replaced, or myself.
Fine, okay. If I may ask on a slightly different point then, so long as that is cleared up, because it was stated later down in the report, when it comes to contract monitoring, your main resources have been those 3 monthly meetings with Legacy and also the annual report. And you're focusing, you've admitted that we need to have more direct contact with the data so we have better monitoring internally instead of relying on Legacy. But have you thought within the contract much at all about what information is not being given through the annual report? Have you been giving feedback regarding information that is not being disclosed? I went back and had a look at the annual report just now, and there was not much at all regarding emissions, for example, which is a key part of monitoring contracts in the current day and age. So has there been any thoughts about additional information that may be required outside of the generic complaints, for example, that isn't within the annual report that you need to discuss on a more regular basis, and have some kind of a better mechanism other than these meetings, which are minuted but aren't perfect?
Chair, just to say, I give you a start of the types of things we're going to be monitoring within the report. I list them under the various headings. The things that Legacy Park would put forward are okay. It's the standard report they produce in other councils they work, but for us we require more information. So we will be asking for a lot more information they're currently providing, and we'll be asking for things that they may not be so comfortable about providing. Also to say, as I just said, we meet Parkwood quarterly, we speak to them daily. So, and I'm meeting them this week. So it's not the only time we come into contact. So we talk to them about building projects, about performance, about issues within the centres. It's a weekly, daily thing. So we have a very good relationship with them. It's only that formal monitoring meeting is just that once a quarter. We meet with them much more frequently than that. So all I can point to, and if Chair of Committee's got time later to have a look at the report that went to scrutiny, the Wales Audit Office did a review of use of the Sustainable Development Principles within leisure centres in 2020 and found that there were issues in terms of us dealing with the 5 ways of working, primarily because the contract was let in 2012 when that was not heard of. So on the strength of that, Parkwood appointed an officer specifically to work on the Sustainable Development Principle. And in that report that went to the February Scrutiny Committee, there is a full report dealing with that principle, a 5-year plan. this is not an organisation, in my experience, that is going to say we can't do that, we don't want to do that. So if you want some comfort that they're going to ask, they're going to provide what I asked them for, have a look at that report, because that 5-year document, in terms of people who don't use the leisure centres, essentially, it's about how you, it's all well and good asking those who walk through the door. This is about how you get people through the door. They did that at our request, at the behest of the audit report back in 2020. So I've got every confidence that they'll do what we asked them to do. And I'm attending until they do, essentially. That's why I'm attending the next meeting, and those following, until I'm happy that my audit colleagues say that this is absolutely fine.
Okay. Are there any other questions? No, I've got a couple of questions. Obviously, as you quite rightly say, Miles, it's your contract. So, you know, whether or not the contractor likes it or not, you know, you set the parameters, the terms of reference by which they obviously respond. Can I assume that there's a new contract in place then? Because you said there was one which was extended by 18 months to 2024. I assume that's gone out for a re-tender, and Legacy has won to that tender process and actually been appointed as your preferred contractors, I assume.
Sorry, Chair, it must be a misunderstanding there. No, they had a 10-year contract initially with a 5-year extension option. So their contract was initially 2012 until 2022. And we had COVID in the middle of that. So this is all documented through the executive process. We agreed a 7-year and a number of months contract to take them up to 2029. And that was agreed. It was slightly longer than the 5-year extension that we had in the original contract, but we went through all the legal processes essentially because of the 2 years lost for COVID. So it's an extension of the current contract with some changes, because the original contract had 5 leisure centres in it. This only has 4. There was a leisure centre called Home View, which is no longer being used, but there were other things added into the contract. There was some 4G facilities added in, but essentially it's the same contract as we let in 2012, just extended.
I assume terms and conditions have been amended though, because there's a lot of different things going on now in 2024 than there was in 2012. So that's okay. Obviously, the 5.1.2 raises the issues that the annual report went to the Healthy Living and Social Care Scrutiny Committee on the 6th of February. The unfortunate thing is, I don't know, and this committee doesn't know what the outcome of that committee was, and did it make any recommendations whatsoever in regards to the annual report. Obviously, if there were any issues raised or any concerns raised in that report, you know, what has the scrutiny committee decided to do about it? Where's it going to refer it to? And, you know, does it have any implications? I'm sorry to pose you that question, but obviously we've not got the information.
It's a very good question, Chair. Is it not a problem? Yeah, I wasn't there, but I watched the transcript, and the annual report was well received from the members that were there. It followed some visits to leisure centres where we were showing them some of the investments that we've made in leisure centres. So there was no recommendation to Cabinet that followed, but there was generally good comment within the debate. There was a point raised about works that are programmed to be undertaken, like new gyms and new suites, where members felt they didn't have enough information about when that project would be completed. But again, we can weave that into the PIs, but generally the actual report was well received. I think, to be fair to members, there was some discussion about performance indicators, and I think if I had been there, I probably would have said to them, we need to get a bigger suite of these, and we need to test them a little bit more. But if I watched the transcript and looked at the minutes, and it seems like it went down really well.
Okay, because obviously if that report is primarily prepared by Legacy, presumably with your comments on, and if these regular meetings haven't been taking place with under the contract management, then any issues presumably haven't been picked up in that report, which you as an officer of the authority may have raised. So whilst it's all sweetness and light from Legacy's point, it'd be useful just to understand if the regular meetings had been taking place, if there were any issues to be raised. I did pick up the point everyone else has made. I had a so what question in regards to complaints, in regards to councils received no complaints, but the contractors had. And I think the point you made, which is very relevant, and the point I make all the time in our complaints committee, is that you need to learn lessons from the complaints. If you don't know what they are, then you can't adjust the service or change the service accordingly with Legacy. And for the council's complaints report, it's good reading, really, because there's no complaints coming through. So, next year we'll have 117 extra complaints coming through, I'm sure, to be picked up. But, they're very important in regards to performance management to the people moving forward. The issues have been raised around additional resources. There are no implementation dates on some of these recommendations or references. So I'm just wondering whether we can pick that up going forward as well. In 5.2.2, you've got the condition surveys. Property services to schedule condition surveys during Q1. Is that Q1 of the financial year or Q1 of the year? And do you have an update?
Chair, that's their quarter. It starts in July. So I haven't got an update about I know it's July to August. So I haven't got an update, but it'll be something I'll be raising with my property colleagues outside this meeting. And that's one of the things that should be taken at least annually, because they're responsible for the fabric of the internal fabric of the building, and there needs to be a check on that, doesn't it, to make sure that they are undertaking their work as per the contract. So that I'm hopeful that the first ones will start in July.
Again, that's very important in regards to sanctions against. I know they're bringing in a revenue cost, but if the building's falling round their ears, it's not a good service for the customer out there. And the only other one I've got is 5.3.2, which is the council does more to independently verify performance data. And obviously, you've set out what's happening there. But the action taken says working with Legacy and ICT to get access to the data. So if you haven't got access to the data yet, how can you have implemented it to ensure that you're complying with all those bits and pieces? So I'm just wondering when are you going to get access, and when will that information provide you with the information you need for sort of part of the monitoring of this contract?
Thank you, Chair. I have got access. I perhaps should have prepared better. Could have shared it with you. It's a Google dashboard which looks really, really good. So I'm hoping to add our additionals to that Google dashboard, and then to use that so we share the data between us, and we'll be able to show you within the dashboard where we've tested it. We probably won't test everything, because they need to look after themselves to a degree, because the more people come to the door, the more money they receive. So it'd be foolish for them to not do certain things properly. So we're looking at using that dashboard so that we can actually bring it to committee, but also we can share it between us and Parkwood. So I have access to it now.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from anyone? No? Any comments? No? I think the only comment I would have, whilst there's an annual report provided to the scrutiny committee, I think it would be worthwhile doing a 6-monthly report. So, as the contract progresses, that's reported to scrutiny, because it's a bit late in the day to report 12 months down the line when things may be going badly wrong. I'm sure you'll make people aware of it if the wheel starts to come off, but it's whether or not the scrutiny committee should receive one in regards to where we're at now and all the new processes and procedures you're putting in place to ensure that scrutiny are content with that. Have they got any changes to make to it to recommend to cabinet or whatever? And and then maybe go back to the annual cycle when things are on a very even keel. That's any comment I'd make.
Chair, I think that's a very fair point. If we're meeting monthly, we should be able to inform committee at least every couple of months of what we found, so there's no surprises in the annual report. The problem with the annual report is in the past, and it's quite a while ago, isn't it? So that's a fair point. I'm happy to report the scrutiny at more regular frequencies. In fact, we could report as just officers, and then possibly bring Parkwood in for the end of year. So that's not a big ask, to be honest.
It's lovely. Obviously, we'd have to recommend that the cabinet to adopt, to take forward. So, but I think that's something we should recommend that you report regularly as you can. Are there no other comments? Can I suggest that we ask you back in 6 months' time to give us feedback as to where you are, pick up the points which haven't been implemented, and hopefully those where it's partly implemented, they shall have been implemented. And can I thank you for your time, Miles, this evening for answering our questions. Councillor Hooper, sorry.
Miles, you mentioned the report that was worth reading. Perhaps we could get that circulated to members as well, so we can see about the ways of working. I think that'd be interesting. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Miles. Obviously, if you want to leave, you carry on. I'm sure you've got better things to do now than sit in the committee. It may be worthwhile. Matt's going to make a discussion in a minute. So, okay. Going on to item 6, which is on the agenda, which is the Oracle Fusion. Are we doing 7 first, are we? Okay, right, okay. Sorry, I've been suggested. Sorry, Gemma, I didn't mean to keep you longer than is necessary as well. Item 7 on the report, then we'll deal with now. And my understanding is it's just in regards to the statement of accounts review and lessons learned. The rest of the matters aren't on the agenda tonight. They will be for the next committee.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I originally started writing the paper to include accounting policies, changed my mind and then didn't amend the title. So apologies for that, getting you all excited about accounting policies and then not delivering then. This report, I suppose, is scene setting for the accounts that will be coming before you in July. And as part of the preparation for the 23-24 accounts, we had a session internally within the accountancy team, but also with our colleagues in Audit Wales. I'm not sure whether they're on the call tonight, but I promise you I have shown the report to them and got their agreement before I brought it before you. And I think in terms of their feedback, I think they felt that the accounts were of generally good quality, which I think was reflected in the ISA 260 report. But there were, of course, some areas that we could certainly look to improve on for 23-24. So I think one of the things that we both agreed is whilst we did meet in person a couple of times, and I think for some of their trainees, that was the first time they've been to a client site for an audit. I think we felt that we could choose to do that right at the very beginning of the audit, and that would help build relationships as we progress through the audit. So that was definitely something that we're going to look to implement for 23-24. We also started using Inflow for the first time as part of the 22-23 audit. And I think it went really well, particularly at the start of the audit. I think certainly I was slightly overwhelmed with the number of queries and issues towards the end of the audit. But I think we've discussed with the audit manager perhaps structuring it slightly differently. So we're going to keep the queries and the sample requests separate from the working papers, and that will give us slightly more clarity about where issues are outstanding. And we've also agreed that we will agree kind of response time. So we are, Audit Wales are really clear about how long we will be taking to go back to them on certain issues. And I think as an accountancy team, we have made some progress in terms of getting more people involved with some of the notes of the accounts. So hopefully that will help speed up response times as well. We had some really good feedback about the quality of the working papers, particularly in the capital space. So we had one of the Vicky Lloyd, who manages the technical team, leading on the preparation of the capital working papers last year, and they were, I think, Audit Wales were really pleased with the quality of those working papers, and I think there were some notes about improvements that we could make elsewhere. All in all, I think, you know, communication is good between us and the Audit Wales team. I think historically, we perhaps have communicated better in the run-up to an audit. So certainly prior to COVID, we did a lot more interim work prior to the audit, and we would come to Audit Wales with some of our emerging issues and proposals for how we would be managing those. And I think we have taken steps to try and make sure that's happening more for the 23-24 accounts, so particularly in the capital space, where historically we had lots of discussion about surplus assets and assets held for sale, for instance. So we have taken those steps this year. And one of the other challenges that's outlined in the report is around the IT elements of the audit, which is obviously an ever-increasing element of the audit, but is particularly was particularly significant last year because of the new auditing standards that Audit Wales were auditing us for the first time under. And I think obviously some of our colleagues across the council haven't been used to responding to Audit Wales on some of these queries. So Audit Wales have started that piece of work far earlier, and of course we're in a better position because we're building on the work that was established in 22-23. In terms of 23-24, we're obviously quite a way into the accounts preparation cycle now. And I think on the whole, I would say we're in a similar position to last year, maybe slightly better. We're on track to, I hope I haven't jinxed myself now, I think we're on track to complete the accounts by the 30th of June. Certainly won't be any earlier. We will, as in last year, be preparing accounts also for the two joint committees, so for the Regional Adoption Service and the Shared Regulatory Service as well. We had really good feedback on the Regional Adoption Service accounts, which is good because that was our first year preparing them, and that's always a bit nerve-wracking. And there aren't any major technical changes to the accounts, again, which should be on our side. In line with previous years, we do, again, have some quite significant valuations going through the accounts, which are quite time-consuming. But we're in a good position in terms of establishing the outturn, and we've got the majority of the capital funding and enhancements well on their way now. I think we're in a relatively good position to move forward with finalising the accounts. In terms of Audit Wales, I think I've put in the report that they'd be looking to kind of sign off the accounts in November. I think their actual plan in terms of their resource plans to try and bring the audit timetables back is to finalise the accounts in October. Of course, Audit Wales will be bringing the audit plan going forward as well. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you for that, Gemma. Are there any questions? Gunder Hooper.
Thanks for that, Chairman. I think it feels there's a degree of confidence, which I think this committee would be pleased to hear as well. I've just got a question on 2.5, when you talked about last year there was delay from third parties. I'm just wondering how that's going this year and whether or not we're seeing similar delays.
So certainly we've looked to kind of build on the communication with Big Fresh Catering because I think there was some information coming through quite late in terms of the group position. So I think we're in quite a good place there. Joint committees is a real mixed bag. I think the majority of joint committees are relatively straightforward and the information has been coming through, and some of them are obviously within our own control. I think City Deal, you'll be aware the accounts are for 22-23, I think are still subject to audit approval. And I expect a similar delay for 23-24, although I haven't agreed that with the relevant accountant. But that's my expectation.
Are there any other questions? No? Are there any comments? I'll like to make a comment. Can I just say, lessons learnt are very, very important for any function that the authority carries out. We're going to deal with a lessons learnt paper in the next matter item, but it's very important that we learn lessons and actually build upon, those areas for improvement which are identified by Wales Audit or actually identified by yourselves. So I think, you know, hopefully there won't be one next year, but if there is, hopefully it's a small one. But can I say thank you to you, Gemma, and your team for obviously all the hard work they do in dealing with the accounts and getting us to a place where they're submitted to Audit Wales for sign off. There's a tremendous amount of work, obviously, that goes on. It shouldn't be underestimated. So if you could please thank, on behalf of the committee, all your colleagues for the hard work they do, and long may it continue.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, recommendation really then is to note the report from Gemma. Can I have someone to move, please? Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Goodjohn, thank you. Anyone against? Nope, thank you. That's carried. Thank you, Gemma. You can leave if you wish. Oh, you're going to stay? Right, okay. If we then now go on to the item Oracle Fusion implementation, part 1. There is a part 2 report, which hopefully we don't have to get digging into, but it's there for your obviously information and presumably deliberation. But I should imagine that the vast majority of the items will be picked up by Matt when we go through. I think we're just having some technical issues. So who's leading on this? Matt, okay.
We've got a brief presentation to take you through the report. I'm conscious it's quite a lengthy covering report and an even lengthier lessons learned report. So I've got about a dozen slides, perhaps take 10-15 minutes going through.
Matt, can I just assure you, apart from the presentation, I would have hoped that all the members will have read the report and digested it. I'm sure it has been discussed in other places in this council. So, you know, I don't want you to spend enormous amount of time on your report, because if people haven't read the report, then actually they're doing injustice to the role they hold. So happy for you to go through the presentation slides, which I'm sure will highlight most of the major issues. But if any members then got burning questions on the report, then they can deal with it then. But I don't want you to go through the report.
No.
As long as members are happy with that, because I think people should read it.
Okay, I'll pull out the key highlights of the report in the presentation, Jay. When this first came to Scrutiny Committee on the 20th of March, there was a fairly busy agenda. So members actually asked for it to be deferred and come to a later meeting. So it eventually came on the 17th of April. What we did do in that first meeting, though, there were a couple of requests from members for some further information. And that's why what was a Part 1 report gave rise to a Part 1 and Part 2 report that you have on your agenda this evening. The Part 1 and Part 2 reports are identical, just about. So there's no content in Part 2 that you haven't got in the Part 1 report. What you do have, though, and we took the opportunity to do in the Part 1, there's a bit more information around the chronology of the project. The original report in March just started off at the project reset in January 22. And we did have a request for the contract as well. So that's the Part 2 element of this. There's a summary of a part of the contract and also the full contract. And I'll refer to those in the presentation in a moment, because there's some real salient points to make around that. So if you excuse me, the presentation does run in a very similar order, if not identical order, to the report. So I'm just going to look at the overrun and some of the governance around how the decisions were made around the resources being applied to the project. Take you briefly through the chronology of the project, and then go into the heart of this presentation that's around a very thorough lessons learned process, the findings from that, the recommendations, and how we intend to take those forward. So this next slide takes you through the overall finances and through the life of the project. They're slightly different on this slide to the body of the report. We issued a supplemental to corporate performance and resources. There was an unallocated contingency line out. So this is the same bottom line numbers. What there has been throughout this process is clear governance around those increased costs and how they were managed, right through from the original business case going through to emergency powers in April 22, an updated report to Cabinet in September 22, and a further emergency powers report in the following February. In amongst all that, this was covered off regularly in the quarterly monitoring reports to Cabinet and also through SLT and business Cabinet meetings. It is worth noting, and we'll probably make this point a little bit through this evening around value for money. That original £1.5 million budget was very, very ambitious. The council was never going to implement the new system for that amount of money, and we've seen that in recent press releases. Certainly, with a neighbouring Welsh county that had a business case for 4.8 million and implemented at 10.7, and more recently an English South Coast county they were going to implement for £3 or £4 million. They've drawn a line at a £20 million spend, and they're now going through a re-implementation, and they're probably going to spend double that. So in terms of value for money, I think the initial sums were unrealistic. We've probably spent more than we would like to eventually, and delays in the implementation have certainly added to that. The brief chronology, and this is very pertinent as well. Oracle had informed us that the EBS system wasn't going to be supported, and in the summer of 2020, a business case came forward to implement a new or select a new system for implementation. This was right in the middle of a couple of lockdowns, so quite a busy period in terms of capacity for the council. Once the decision was made to go with Oracle Fusion, that was a direct award. There's effectively no competition, is there, once you've made the decision about that. What there was then competition around was the implementation partner, and that was Avosis, and that was through a G-Cloud framework and a series of assessments and virtual site visits with that company. There was then in 2021 relatively limited progress made with the project, and again some of that can certainly be down to the pandemic, but just the general capacity of the teams who we were expected to implement this system in any case. So towards the end of 2021, it was very clear that there would need to be a project reset, and the original go live dates weren't deliverable. At that point, the council brought in fresh project management resource, and there was some review of the scope of the project, and also a recognition at that time that because of the delays in the system, that the EBS system was going to have to be maintained for a longer period of time, and the bulk of that update was provided in that April 22 EP. The team worked really hard across the summer, going for a November go live. They came up upon a number of challenges across that period, some of which was due to the groundwork not having been done early in the project. So things like data migration and parallel running were more problematic than they maybe ought to have been. What was clear during that summer is that there certainly was not sufficient capacity in-house to deliver this implementation, and further resource was brought in to back up in-house teams. And so, consequently as well, further extension of EBS and additional costs in there too. I think certainly for me, having joined the council in April 22, I think the biggest or the toughest decision that had to be made was in the autumn, There'd been really good progress made across the early autumn to hit that November go live, but we did just fall short, and that was because we weren't quite getting the tolerances on the parallel running and meeting the thresholds that we had in our contract with Avosis. That gave us a really tough decision to make, in that once you didn't hit a November deadline because of Christmas break, New Year, December and January aren't times you're going to go live with a payroll system. And then beyond that, you're starting to hit the end of the financial year, and the challenges that would have given us trying to close your statutory accounts down and implement a new system at the same time, that was obviously not feasible. So there was significant additional cost during that period, as it was essential that additional resource we brought in we retained, because it's hard come by in the first instance. We did, Corporate Resources had asked for a lessons learned report when we first highlighted the additional costs of the project. What we said to them was we would do that once the new system was in. There were delays then because of a contractual dispute, so we needed to resolve that early in the summer before we moved on to actually doing this very thorough lessons learnt piece of work. So it's certainly the case that when we had the project reset, the project manager that we brought in was extremely professional and thorough. All the board meetings were recorded, and really good comprehensive paperwork with the project from that time. So it made sense. I think he probably thought he'd seen The Last of Us at Go Live, but we brought him back to lead on the lessons learnt review, and we did that with the facilitation of some specific software as well. There's a series of workshops, interviews, pulling together of data, and that formed the basis of the report around a number of key themes. And those, I've just pulled those out on the next slide. Those around the capacity of the organisation to run this sort of project effectively, the general project methodologies that we put in place, and the effective use of project tools. Key here as well, the testing infrastructure, and I'll talk a moment about how is that around the contractual arrangements, and then effective project team planning. So I've got 2 or 3 slides just pulling out those priority recommendations. There were 59 recommendations coming out, and 30 or so priority ones. The initial ones are around organisational capacity to run effective projects, and actually this a very handy first lesson for us. We shouldn't ever see this project in isolation. It's around an authority that continues to learn about the way in which it implements projects. So having a learning approach in general is something that we should be doing. It's a possibility that certainly at the outset that there wasn't enough attention to detail around the quality and strategy documentation, and fully appreciating the nature of the project that we had in front of us. Some challenges around implementation partner and the due diligence, but I've said, in normal circumstances you'd physically go out and visit sites. That wasn't possible here. A lot of that was done virtually, so to some extent you can understand some of where we got to with that. And then a couple of comments around the project management toolkit. There wasn't huge awareness of the toolkit during the project. Certainly the project manager who came back and had a look at the review is of the opinion that it's broadly fit for purpose. It does need review, but what it does need is awareness raising and training across the council. The interest in lesson 6 on the next slide was a reflection of the project manager. He came in and ran the project under a Prince 2 type methodology, but it wasn't until he really carried out this review as aware of our own. So once he came in, he adopted an appropriate methodology, but there wasn't clarity around that. There's some lessons around project gateway control and moving from business case to PID, and making sure that everything's lined up before you take those steps. linked, I guess, to a lot of these do overlap. And I guess linked to some of the other comments is effective risk management. I don't think that the council possibly understood the level of risk that was attributable to this particular project and what a significant undertaking it was. Letter 55 I've alluded to a couple of times. Corporate Performance Resources asked to see the contract. I don't think there was much value in them actually seeing that. There's not a lot to discern from it except the absence of a schedule of works. So there wasn't anything directly to hold the contractor, the implementation partner to account on. Management of stage boundaries, certainly the view that we reference to legal services of contractual obligations not being met and sufficiently thorough. And also we had legal services involved in the project at key times, but they needed to be in there a little bit more at the start is the general view. Then next slide, themes 3 and 4. I've alluded this testing infrastructure, and this was one that certainly meant that more resource was required from the council than perhaps appreciated. So there are a couple of things missing. The testing of the system should have been the responsibility of the implementer, end up being our responsibility. So what we should have in future instances of this, that we should have a strategy and a framework that they should be testing against. So there are a couple of issues coming from that particular theme. And then the next one does overlap with some of the earlier comments around the selection of the implementation partner. And that's around, we appointed a project manager in the probably the January or February after we had appointed Evasis. Given the nature and complexity of this project, and I guess some of this is hindsight sometimes, isn't it? There would have been better that they'd been there right at the start and been involved of the selection of that partner. And the last one is about the project team and understanding the capacity issues that the council has, and that there isn't, when you look at some of the comments we had with the earlier reports this evening about the capacity that the council has, we've got really tight teams here, and a project of this nature is always going to need additional external resource for it to work effectively. So those are the key themes out of the report. I've zipped over them a little bit more than I did at scrutiny meeting, but there's obviously a number of steps for us to go through now. So we're obviously inviting you to make comment this evening, and those comments, along with those from Corporate Performance Resources, will go on to Cabinet. We've already been sharing the experience of the project, so that does inform live projects. We will, once it's been to Cabinet, have a session with SLT and heads of service so that those lessons learned in the processes are clearly understood, and we'll be in the process of pulling an action plan together. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We're into questions now. Do we have any questions? Anyone poised there? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really glad we've got independent lay members on this committee who can probably take a bit more of a dispassionate view of this, because the word that I wrote down, first word I wrote, was that I was horrified by what had happened here. And the first thing that I think was really missing, has been missing throughout. Matt, you just talked about clear governance, but there's been a complete lack of scrutiny throughout this process. And it feels like that's been something that, whilst I wouldn't call it deliberate, it feels very much as though councillors have been left in the dark on this. This committee hasn't been aware of this to this level. And yet we've had a overspend that's gone up from 1.5 million to 5.2 million. There are reasons for it. The first one I think you alluded to is that this was that we got it wrong in the first place, which was a point of concern. But we spend a lot of time talking about, and I think, and I don't mean to belittle the learning experience. But at some point, people need to take responsibility for this. We're here to talk on behalf and to represent residents of the Vale of Glamorgan. And this is a huge issue. Sadly, not enough people will actually watch this meeting. Sadly, not enough people will actually know that with the extent of the issue that we've come across. Yeah, but there have been people involved in this council who followed this process all the way through. And if we're concerned, and we had it with earlier things, and I referenced the fact that when we reduce resources to this council, that has an impact. And when I think the phrase you talked about capacity, if we don't have the capacity to do these things, we will fail and we will cost residents money. We will continually get these things wrong. And that ultimately, and this is where I'm glad there'll be more of a dispassionate view, but that ultimately is a political issue. And the political responsibility needs to be taken. We spend a lot of time in this council hearing about how good the council is, how well it's doing. This is an abject failure of a monumental perspective. I'm glad that we're sharing the lessons with others. But frankly, I don't want to be part of a twee learning experience. I want somebody to say, we got it wrong. And I want that to be owned politically. Thank you, Chair.
I assume that was a comment, not a question. Right. Okay, are there any other questions? Nigel? Nigel, you're okay? Nigel, you're frozen. Nigel, go ahead. You're on mute. Nigel, I'm being advised, go out and come back in. Are there any other questions before Nigel comes back in? No, do you mind, committee? Wait. Oh, Matthew, go on.
Apologies, Chair. I'm a little bit late on the hand up. I will just ask, I guess, two questions about the learning points or how we've taken things away. And maybe this is half comment, half question to start with. I mean, the idea that this project wasn't classified as high risk to begin with really surprises me. From kind of experience, anytime you are dealing with a financial transformation project or a replacement of a financial system, it has to be high risk given the risk involved. So I guess my question from that one is, are there any other projects, not being of a similar nature, but of the risk of being misclassified? We considered that as part of this exercise. That's number one. And number two is probably some lessons learned from some of the more famous examples, if that's the right word, of these things going wrong, in terms of the right security configurations being in place, the right segregation and duties controls, the right audit trails, and a little bit of comfort around. Now we are saying, yes, the system is up and running, but are we sure it's in the place it needs to be? Thank you.
I can start, but possibly others will want to come in as well. Part of the reason for going to SLT, but also, SLT heads of service that I've just mentioned, will be around awareness raising, but we've already been doing some of that as well. So the draft lessons learned report went to SLT quite a couple of months ago now. So there is that awareness around the importance of high risk projects. And then on the security, what we do have is a really good product once we've got it implemented, and we've said that in the report. And what we'll be having is a rolling cycle of assurance from our internal audit team on that. So elements of the new financial system have already been tested, and that'll be a regular piece of work that we'll see. But certainly the system at the moment, we're fully assured about how effective it's working.
Matthew, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so, Chair. And I, at risk of asking a third question, or maybe just echo what Councillor Hooper said, I think it's possibly not a question that can be answered, but is it right that this report is only coming here, or this, not this report specifically, but this issue is only coming to Governance and Audit Committee now?
My understanding it's been elsewhere to several places. So can you confirm where it's been, Matt?
Yeah, it's obviously been through SLT and Business Cabinet and scrutiny and here.
Thank you. Nigel, are you back with us? I think we're still having problems, Nigel. Is he still there? Nigel, do you want to try again? Yeah. Nigel, can I suggest you go out and come back in again? And if you can't get in again, unfortunately, we can't wait all night. So, Councillor Goodjob.
Apologies. In the meantime, can I ask the obligatory question from corporate performance? Why weren't we able to get minutes of SLT supplied to this meeting, as was requested by corporate performance?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and my apologies that you don't have the relevant minutes in front of you this evening. I think the minute from CPR was a suggestion that if it was possible that we would bring them to this meeting, and in their absence, I'll make sure that the references that were made to SLT throughout the period are included as part of the report to Cabinet. But I can confirm that the matter was regularly discussed by the leadership team.
Yeah, I think that causes more problems than the answer, really, because if you haven't got the information before you here, is how do they, how does the committee make its decision when it's not got all the facts before it? But clearly, it may be worth if you could circulate it to Governance or Audit. I don't know when this matters go into Cabinet with our comments and that as scrutiny. And then if anyone's got any comments, then they can feed them in.
Certainly, no problem at all, Chair. And we're aiming to get the reference to the next available Cabinet, which will be the one in 2.5 weeks' time, so a fortnight on Thursday.
Nigel, are you there now? He's not back. Okay, I'll make some comments then. Clearly, when I first saw this report, I was extremely concerned. However, I think whatever's said, once you're in a position, then you have to deal with it as best you can. Now, I understand my first thoughts, I said, it was very wrong at the very beginning of this. The right team wasn't round the table making the right decisions. No one knew exactly what they wanted, and a contract of some kind was let on that basis. I think, as we've learning lessons here, and the lessons learned in my mind can be sort of implied on the other matters we discussed tonight, the contract for the food, the contract for the leisure centre. It's making sure you get the right people around the right table with the right expertise to ensure that whatever you're going to deliver for the council or for whichever service you are going to deliver for, are round the table at the very beginning before anything else is done. So, you know, always, it's clear from within the report, those people weren't the right people around the table. Clearly that the figure that was produced in the report, which was 1.5 million for this project, wasn't enough. And even if you have a look at the tables currently in the report, there's nothing for archiving, there's no contingency, etc., etc. So I think getting the right people around the table, whether that's the professional IT consultants, if it's an engineering consult, you know, the engineers around there, you get the lawyers in very early on. I don't necessarily agree with recommendation 59. I think the lawyers need to be in at the very inception of this matter, and that, as with all the other professionals around the table, finance, HR, if there's implications in that, actually to work that through. Once you're into this contractual relationship, then obviously someone's got to make the decision whether we continue with it or whether we don't. And to get out of a contract can just be as costly to get out of it than pursuing it. And again, obviously, later on into the contract, people found that there were errors going forwards or the right specification wasn't there, and that was then being picked up. I'm not saying on the hoof, but actually someone got in and the professional got in and said, actually, we need to do X, Y, and Z, whilst you're also running the existing system. So there's a cost to that. I've noted the dates. It was quite interesting because you raised the issue of April 22. Hopefully people won't forget that slap bang just before the elections, the local government elections. So, you know, there will be people around the room who will be doing other things. There'll be new members in here with the effect from May 22. I'm not saying that's a diversion, but, you know, we're in a very difficult time. We've just come through COVID as well. So, you know, it's a very fluid situation. Clearly, you picked up the issues about people being informed all the way through this process via emergency processes and procedures, reports going to Cabinet. And again, the only comment I would make there is that whether you're in the majority group or in the opposition group or you're a chair of scrutiny, then you've got every opportunity to call those matters in if you're not aware of what's happening. So, you know, clearly if someone had picked this up and said, right, there's a decision being made by way of a delegated power or whatever it is, then my understanding is the authority's constitution allows for that to be called in within whatever it is, 5 days or 6 days. So people do need to keep a weathered eye on it. I think the very outset, when Gemma did her report, a lessons learned paper is extremely important. You're holding yourself up to a mirror here. And I think the council in bringing this forward and the officers have held the mirror up themselves, realised that there are some significant areas for improvement in dealing with high profile projects, and actually that's now being dealt with by an independent individual coming in and sort of working their way through it. And I think whatever's said, and I hear what Councillor Hooper said, I think, you know, you've got to be congratulated for that, because, you know, lots of authorities would try and deal with this in alternative ways. And, you know, to do this and to bring this into the public domain, I think, you know, obviously is credit to the organisation, its officers and its members. It's not a nice place to be overspent by £3-4 million isn't the best place to be. However, it would be an interesting discussion that had this been formulated in the right format at the very beginning, how much would it have actually costed? So how far off were we in regards to getting where we are now if the contract had been formulated properly? I'm not saying, you know, it may have not overspent again, But unfortunately, in things like this, and you know, the lawyers will tell you, there are unforeseen costs everywhere. And if anyone's got that crystal ball that can predict how much you can overspend on a contract when you start off from it, then I think you ought to go out there and sell it into the open market. So we are where we are. Unfortunately, I think, you know, there are lessons to be learned. I think that lessons learned paper needs to be cascaded throughout the organisation, whether it's a high-risk project or a low-risk project. The principles, in my view, are exactly the same. Having dealt with major projects in the past, when professionals bring in people, the lawyers, the HR team, the finances, at the very last moment, and then all of a sudden, those individuals are often seen as the blockers because they actually say, well, hang on a minute, you need to think about this. You know, is very, very important. And I think, you know, provided the council adopts that processing going forward, no one can guarantee that it won't happen again. But with the right processes and procedures in place, the right specification, schedules or whatever, the right contractual terms and conditions, then hopefully, you know, you'll be in a better position. I do agree that some further reporting should have been done. You know, a bit more openness, because the first thing I was thinking about it tonight, you know, where did audit fit into this? All of a sudden, the wheel was going to come off. Understand, obviously, it was reported to the cabinet structure and things like that. I don't believe I have a right to call in anything. And I think for us to be given that assurance, even though we would have been newly in post, certainly I would have been newly, and the lay members would have been newly in post, it would have been worthwhile just to say, look, there are some issues here. And we would have wanted the assurance that then, from moving on, I would have wanted that the right processes were in place to deal with it going forward. So that said, you know, I would hope that the authority does learn its lessons from moving forward. It does does adopt the process in regards to the lessons learned in most contractual relationships moving forward. And clearly, I think, you know, the council, I would hope, would acknowledge that in moving this forward. This system, I'm told, is state of the art now. There is an opportunity, I understand, for others to come on board to utilise the system and to provide a service maybe to others. So I'll need to be clarified because again, it's an all-embracing service in regards to maybe other authorities and that's, you know, utilising your service. And again, you know, that is a way forward, I'm sure, in regards to the collaborative agenda in local government throughout Wales. Is Nigel on? Yeah. Nigel, are you on? Are you there, Nigel? No.
Chair, he has emailed me his question. Would the committee like me to read out what he's...
Yes, please, if you could.
Okay. It's meant to be covered by Matthew Evans, but I'll just read out anyway. What lessons have been learned in relation to risk management in the council? At the start of the project, which was in the middle of COVID, this was assessed as not a high risk, which was obviously incorrect. Projects like this are always a risk, and therefore what learning is there for operational and/or strategic risk management within the council?
Tom?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ireland. I think there are probably two elements to that. One is the kind of risk identification in terms of the projects. And one of the findings from the lessons learned report is that we need to train and talk to our colleagues far more about the project management toolkit, of which that risk evaluation and then risk management within projects is an integral part. Matt mentioned that we're going to be doing a piece of work with heads of service and directors in terms of sharing the lessons learned. We're going to go further than that, as you'd expect us to, in terms of delivering some training and support in terms of the use of that project management toolkit. I think it's fair to say that that there are definite lessons to be learnt as far as that goes. So that's the kind of managing the risk within the project environment. And then the second element of Mr. Island's question around the approach for risk management as a whole. And this is something that we've done some reflection on in terms of how do we identify the levels of risk associated with individual projects and their nature. So committee will be aware that the WICIS social services system has been included now on the corporate risk register. That's, I think, that's probably a good example of where we've seen a risk within a service area being managed, but it reaches a certain threshold and at that point becomes a more major risk to the organisation as a whole. And that's something that is part of the risk management strategy refresh that we'll be bringing to your committee before the recess, if at all possible, Chair. We'll look to solidify a little bit better.
Thanks for that, Tom. Can I just say, clearly we've got those 59 recommendations which have come out of the lessons learned. Will there be a workshop with members to explain the process going through? Those members who are interested, I would hope. But, you know, clearly the officers are very important, but it may also be an understanding for officers as well. Members. Tom?
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. And absolutely, we're always open to the idea of doing those kind of workshops with members. They've been really effective on some of the performance work and also about risk. If, with your permission, Chair, perhaps we can take that one away to look at the best way of framing that, whether that's on this particular lessons learned report, or actually maybe possibly as part of wider project management, because if we're going to be talking with our colleagues about how to effectively use the toolkit, it would maybe be useful to talk to members about that toolkit and how it might be possible then to scrutinise activity through the process. So we'll give some thought to it, but yeah, of course, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Prothero first.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So this particular topic has been debated in my committee, Performance and Resources, for quite a few hours. So I'm not going to really say very much that I haven't already said. I just wanted to make a point though, because where we went wrong, if I can say that, right at the beginning, as you've already reflected on, Chair, is that when we got to the point where we decided we thought we wanted to change our system because it wasn't going to be supported, and we were going to stick with Oracle, and we were going to go with a cloud-based version of Oracle EBS, the commissioning, this is procurement speak, but the commissioning part of that is where we had the absence of expertise. The project manager has done a great job with the lessons learned report, and it is written from a project management perspective. But the absence of that expertise from the commissioning stage of this procurement exercise is why we are where we are. We have learned from this because now we have appointed a head of digital. We've also learned from this because now we are in a strategic relationship with Ardell Procurement. And we will have that strategic support going forward with any other projects. But I just wanted to make sure that that recommendation, which is that when we start a procurement exercise and when we look at our commissioning team, this is a financial system, but it is an IT financial system. And we need to think about that with a cross-functional commissioning team, that there are those people with that expertise or with that subject matter expert, if you like, in the beginning, no matter what it is that we are purchasing. Making that sort of distinction between a project management approach and also the procurement bit of getting the commissioning bit right. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Prothero, for that. Hopefully that endorses what I say. You get the right people around the table at the right time to make this work. So thank you for that. Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Chair. Just first, a point of clarification. You talked about timelines in your comments, and you referenced the April 22 decision. That decision wasn't, and the challenge I think you set was that there's an opportunity for people to come in and to call in decisions, and I accept that. But that decision wasn't published until July, and it said there was an implementation date, a launch date of August. So what's happened is that the timelines are insufficient for people to come in and provide the scrutiny they should be doing. So I think that's a first point of clarity I wanted to make. And the second question is probably to ensure my understanding of what was discussed earlier about the SLT minutes. Are they going to be provided to this committee? Yes or no? Because I wasn't clear in the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. But in terms of the second point, in terms of the availability of any SLT minutes, because the recommendation from CPR was to provide them to this committee, where those SLT minutes make reference to the Oracle issue or project, then we can provide them to the committee. That's no problem at all. It's purely an oversight in terms of not having gone to look through those. The only point of caution I'd give is that certain part of this project obviously straddled that COVID timeline, and SLT was operating in a very different guise at that point because it was looking at the response to the pandemic. So the level of minute taking was associated with the gold response rather than formal SLT minutes, but we can certainly go back through those and pull out any references.
Yes, thanks, Tom. And can I say those, if you could get those out fairly quickly, because if any members wish to make sort of a written rep, which can be picked up then on the response to Cabinet, I think that would be greatly appreciated. Okay. Councillor Good, John.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm really glad to hear about independent members' satisfaction with the lessons learned document in of itself. I think that was much of the reason why corporate performance referenced it over here to governance and audit, was to hear the opinion of independent members on the lessons learned document itself, and if it was satisfied with what came out of the lessons learned document and the way that it was produced. So that is good to hear. I think Councillor Prothero mentioned quite a few points where lessons learnt have already been implemented, which is good to hear about. I think that doesn't undermine the fundamental point that when decisions were made originally, particularly at SLT, I think there was something in what was being mentioned there by you, Chair, in that there was a huge, from my understanding, a large turnover of staff after the April decision making, and that there was a large gap between the members of staff who were making decisions at the start of this process and the members of staff who were making decisions at the end of this process. And additionally, members who were not of the Cabinet were not fully made aware of the situation as early as could have been done, and the opportunity to call in is only if we deem it to be absolutely necessary, that we need to have further scrutiny of where the report is brought in. And I think the main opportunity to do that was probably in October, at which point we were made aware that legal had been made involved. So the opportunities for members to scrutinise before this point was extremely short, I would say. And that is not necessarily a criticism of anyone in particular. However, I think there is the fair point that scrutiny needs to be done as and when a process takes this long. We just didn't anticipate that it would take this long because, quite frankly, the expertise was not there when this was originally decided to be done in the way that it was done. And that is what the lessons learned here is for. So I'm glad that we've had this discussion, and I'm reasonably happy personally with the comments that have been made. I simply hope that these recommendations are not lost, and there's something in the training there. I don't even know if that's necessarily for members, but I think this comes to a more overarching point that has been made by the chair regarding procurement and regarding value for money in procurement and the way that project management is done. So I am personally looking forward from that aspect to the task and finish group that is currently being performed by corporate performance. The new expertise that's been brought in on IT, I think, is extremely valuable from the lessons learnt. And additionally, I do hope that the lesson learnt on scrutiny has been made about let us know sooner, let us know quicker, let us know more when you can, because we can help. We're not here to berate, we're here to help and assist. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Goodjohn. Very relevant. Now, Dr. Johnson. Now, am I allowed to call Dr. Johnson in because he's not a member of the committee?
You can with permission of the committee.
Okay. Are we happy, committee, to allow Dr. Johnson to speak? Anyone against? Put your hand up. No. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Councillors Goodjohn and Hooper, who I think have actually probably made a number of the points that I was hoping to make in this debate around the importance of scrutiny and around the timescales for that. So I just wanted initially to provide a little bit of clarification to some of the comments that were being made earlier, Chair, if you don't mind. As I think Councillor Hooper has said, the April 22 emergency powers were published in the papers for the full council meeting in July, and those papers refer to the Chief Executive emergency powers being used to ensure that the Oracle Fusion system can be implemented on 1st August 2022. So obviously reading those papers in early July, we were not aware as councillors that there was any issue that was outstanding or required resolution. Obviously the go live didn't take place in August 2022, and there was a paper provided to council updating this and explaining that there had been overspend, which arrived at cabinet at the end of September 2022. Then, as Councillor Goodjohn has said, the first real opportunity, the call-in process is if we want to prevent a decision from being enacted. That wasn't the case. But we were then aware that there was an overspend that was underway, and so a corporate performance and resources, of which I'm a member, as is Councillor Prothero, Councillor Goodjohn, and others. There was a request made for a report on this, which is the report that fundamentally is what is in front of us today. That's obviously between us being aware of there being a significant overspend around the time of that in September, October, and the final figure that has then obviously increased again. But the challenge is that we were not aware as councillors of anything being wrong with this until we really saw that cabinet paper in September, and at the first opportunity afterwards that there was to discuss that, corporate performance and resources requested an understanding of what the overspend was, why it was going on, etc., and that we did request updates on that at regular points. So I think the issue here from a scrutiny perspective, as Councillor Goodjohn has already said, is if we don't know something, then we simply can't scrutinise that. But also, and I'm aware that maybe that's something that some of these things will be under part 2, but to be consistently told that we can't have a report, it's coming, rather than have at least something on an interim basis to help us understand the challenges, even if it's part 2, even if it's a briefing, because ultimately what we've had is a situation where, as councillors providing scrutiny, we've requested a report in October 2022, and it first arrived with us in March 2024, nearly 18 months later, and even at that point, the sheer amount of work to go through that paper and to give it the amount of scrutiny that it requires meant that we then postponed that element of the meeting and deferred that item to fundamentally an extraordinary meeting where we could give it the 2.5 hours of scrutiny that it needed, as a first time that opposition councillors or non-members of SLT had seen any of this detail and be able to go through any of this information and ask any questions. So I just wanted to sort of clarify that for you, Chair, because this is not a failure of members of the council who are not on the executive to scrutinise. We asked for reports when it was the first opportunity to do so. It's simply taken a while for that to reach its conclusion for whatever reason. But my point stands that it would have been helpful to have had something interim or briefings so that we could better understand that there had been this amount of an overspend and the reasons for that delay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for allowing me to speak.
Being quite lenient this evening, Councillor John.
If I may make one final additional point to what Councillor Johnson was just saying, I think it is absolutely relevant that legal was involved by the point that we were told to some extent of what was going on. And I think that a huge portion must be allocated to, I asked a question at corporate performance quite bluntly, which got quite a blunt answer, and I can't fully scrutinise 100% of the document because of some of the legal proceedings that have occurred, and we cannot ignore that fact. So when we can't scrutinise, we can't scrutinise. We just need to be given as much information as we can, as early as we can.
Yeah, and I think that point is very relevant. I'm sure the lawyer would tell you that if you breach that, then you're in a contractual dispute again in regards to any settlement that was made. So, important. I think the point that both you and Dr. Johnson has made in regards to the democratic process, I would hope will be picked up by colleagues in Democratic Services and Tom in regards to making sure that relevant reports are timely. It would concern me if you asked for one in 2022 and it didn't come out until 2024. I would be a little bit concerned about that, depending upon obviously whether there are legal issues surrounding it, which it may well have been. But I take on board it's just the basics you would need to know, not the in-depth report in regards to any legal disputes. So hopefully that can be picked up going forward. And again, I completely agree with you. Scrutiny are there to provide help and assistance to the authority and maybe changing policy and procedures or proposals to the Cabinet in regards to it. It's not there to knock the majority group or the lead group. It's there to support and hopefully encourage different ways of working in going forward. Okay, if there's no one else who wish to make any comments, clearly the first, can I just say thank you to the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee for referring it to us. I think it was very relevant that it be referred to us. And the only point I was made is when I picked it up in the local press, I thought, oh, this is something we'll need to look at. And I was all off for asking Audit to intervene in regards to getting the lessons learned paper. But it was great to see that that had already been done. But presumably we note the contents of the report, which you've provided, and the in-depth detail that you've provided to us, that hopefully Gareth can pick up some of the comments that we need to make to Cabinet, which I'm sure Tom and Matt and that can bring, because again, I think we're in a very good place here in regards to lessons learned, as long as they are taken on board by the Council. And I know that certainly, I would hope all politicians get on board in regards to delivering this agenda for the authority. Sarah. Oh, sorry, Sarah. My apologies. I was lunging off in one there.
Pardon? Do I press it again? Yeah. Sorry about that. I just wanted to add that the payroll system that you have is a really good payroll system. It's very successful, and we are I'm personally working with a number of local authorities to help them bring in their systems as well, and to avoid some of the issues that we had. We are ahead of the game with what Oracle are delivering, and so I know it's been a really difficult journey, but what we have now is something to be proud of.
I hope you're charging a consultancy fee. Maybe get a little bit of money back. Yeah, so can I just say we note the contents of the report, and obviously there are some points to be referred up to Cabinet, but obviously they're all there with an intention to improving the process which has been found wanting. Someone prepared to move, please?
Sorry, Chair, can I just interject? We will also refer the comments from corporate performance scrutiny as well.
Okay. Sorry, Nigel, did you have your hand up again? No. Can I have someone to move then, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Goodjohn, anyone against? No, thank you. Item 9, any other item which Chair decide is urgent? There isn't anything. We are supposed to go into part 2 because of the part 2 report. Someone prepared to move that we exclude the press and the public? Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. Anyone against? No. We've got reference 10 then, which is the...
Before we move into part 2, can we